Hello, and welcome to episode number 165 of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I am Kellen, the Red Tank, your host, joined as always by my friends, Mark and Neelan.
Hello.
Hello.
The Orange and Green Tank.
Speaking of green, I know this is sort of like cliche and not the type of humor that I love, but it was just Pie Day yesterday. Kellen's rolling his eyes at even the mention of it.
I'm not rolling my eyes, I'm vomiting.
Okay, great. And so I don't bring it up because of this. I bring it up because I happened to be eating a pie before we went to the recording, and I was genuinely wondering, before I even remembered it was Pie Day, what your guys' favorite pies are, because I don't think I know if you have a favorite pie.
Ooh.
And continuing the green theme, my favorite is like key lime. I love a key lime pie.
Oh, I don't like key lime pie.
Oh, I love it.
It's an inferior version of a lemon meringue pie, which is mostly why.
I like lemon meringue, although I will chop off the meringue.
What?
Yeah, because I just like the lemon. Well, meringue is like weird.
Meringue's great.
But I will take a lemon pie.
It's both together. It's the sweetness and the sourness. That's the whole experience. But for me, it's a pecan nut pie, I think. Probably be my favorite.
Excuse me? Kellen, how come you weren't the person to say excuse me when he said that?
You said it exactly like I was. I'm proud of you.
Sorry, I know where this is going. I'm sorry. Pecan nut pie? You're all French all of a sudden?
We would never say the nut part. We would just say
pecan pie?
Pecan
pie.
Pecan pie.
This is actually a U.S. regional thing. I don't think not even all of the U.S. pronounces it pecan, to my understanding.
Wherever you are, we're not going to say nut afterwards.
Sure.
Right,
pecan nut pie?
That's what he said.
A pecan nut pie.
A little weird, Neelan.
Kellen?
I do not like pie and do not think that fruit belongs in dessert.
Surprise, surprise.
Wow, that's actually so funny because that is almost a literal quote from my brother. I do not think fruit belongs in dessert.
Boom. That's why you like me. I remind you of him. But I'm here in America. No, I really don't. Yeah, no pie. Not interested.
All right.
Unfortunately. It's like a Dutch apple pie is good, right? But that's basically because you've just put a ton of butter on apples. Like,
so what's wrong with that?
Well, I don't want the apples.
You just want the butter.
All right.
Today on the Board Game Barrage podcast, we are going to be talking about a spectrum. And that spectrum is thriving or barely surviving. That is to say, games on one side of the spectrum that make you feel like you've built an engine, that you've built the biggest, baddest Lego castle of all time, and on the other end of the spectrum, games that make you feel pain, like you just can't get your engine going. But before we do that, we're going to be covering the games that we have played this week, including Carnegie, a beige Euro game that Neelan is going to tell us about.
Very much not a beige Euro game.
Well, I haven't looked at it yet, so I had about a 90% chance that would be right. Divvy Dice, a new roll and write game from Stronghold Games, and Mark is going to round us out with a discussion on underwater cities.
Wow, that was a good bubble sound.
See? I got it too. I could do it.
I thought I was the sound guy.
Yeah, that's right. I've learned by watching you.
All right, Neelan, why don't you tell us about the non-beige Euro game, Carnegie?
Carnegie is a game by Xavier Georges, who is the designer of Trois. Carnegie celebrates the sort of life and accomplishments of Andrew Carnegie, who was a famous American capitalist philanthropic figure. In Carnegie, you are running a corporation which is represented by your player board of literal office buildings. It's actually quite cute when you look at it. Your player board has little departments. Your departments have little worker meeples in them, and they're all sitting at their desks in their different departments. Each of these departments is broadly categorized into one of four different actions. So there's human resources, there's management, there's construction, and there's research and development. Then second to that, you also have this map of the US with all of these cities across the country. And on those cities are different sites where you're going to be able to develop either housing projects or commercial projects. Ultimately, at the end of the game, you're going to be trying to manage your company by getting new departments, getting workers in, putting them into the right little desk jobs in order to get these projects out onto the board, linking different cities across the country, and also by making donations, spending large, increasing sums of money to get what are effectively end-of-game scoring goals, whether that's having the most projects in one part of the country or having the most buildings of a certain type, that sort of thing. The way that this breaks down in the structure of the game is actually fairly complicated, though. At the start of the game, you have what is a action timeline. So representing the 4 main categories of actions I just described. HR, management, construction, R&D, each of these has a little timeline associated with it. On your turn, you're going to pick one of those 4 action categories to say to the table, hey, we're doing human resources now. You move the marker along its little timeline, which is both going to trigger an event. An event will either typically be one of these donation phases where you're going to get end-of-game victory points, or an income phase where you're collecting your workers from the map in order to reap the benefits of their specific locations where you've sent them to. Then everyone does the human resources action. What that means is you're going to trigger all of your human resource related departments where you have workers activated. So I will do that first because I'm the one that chose human resources. Then Mark does it, then Kellen does it, and then that's the end of my turn. Then we go to the next player and they choose the next step on the timeline. What this means is that the game has a very strict 20-round structure to it. Each one of those actions is going to be activated roughly 5 times each. There is a little bit more nuance to it because you don't strictly have to do it. Even if it's at the end of the timeline, you can elect to pick a different action. But by the end of 20 actions, you're going to look at the cities you've connected. You're going to look at how many different projects you've placed on the map, which of your donations are giving you end-of-game victory points, as well as how much you sort of researched each of these different project types. And that's going to be your score at the end of the game. One of the things that's so interesting about this game is that there is almost like a Lacerda-esque sort of amount of lead time to everything you're doing, which is to say that a lot of the game is sort of getting your ducks in a row so that you can best execute on an action. And the reason for that is because you don't know strictly what actions are coming up, right? I don't know what Mark is going to choose. Is Mark going to choose construction next turn? If he is, I need to make sure I have some people in my construction department. Is Kellen going to do human resources? If he is,
No.
I need probably not.
I would never choose human resources. I would lose this game every time because you would know without a shadow of a doubt that Kellen would never choose human resources.
Kellen just doesn't have any people in his human resources department ever, which is great because that means that I can choose human resources and know that Kellen will get no benefit from that. So those are the sorts of decisions you're making. You're looking around the table, trying to see which action type you get the most benefit from and the other people at the table don't get benefit from, while also setting yourself up to potentially get something when other people choose an action that might not be the most optimal action for you. But the reason I said that there's a lot of sort of like place setting for this is because of the way that the different actions work. So human resources in particular is about moving your people through your company. It's like taking your meeples out of your lobby and getting them into the appropriate departments.
Even though they don't want to go.
Even if they don't want to be there, exactly. So you have to have done that. You have to have taken a human resources action to get the people into your construction departments. You have to have taken a management action prior in order to get the goods in order to do construction. You have to have taken a research and development action in order to get access to the project so that you can do the construction. So all of these systems interconnect in this very, very cool way, but there is a process to everything you're doing. You're setting up this so that the next action you can get the goods, so that the next action you can do the construction. And you have to make sure you're timing all of that right so that when a donation triggers, you have the cash to make a donation. It's very involved. It is quite a complex game. It's not in the upper echelon of like heavy Euro games, but the first time I played this, I was sort of in awe and really enjoying the process of figuring out the systems of this game in that sort of Lacerda way. It reminds me of the first time I played, say, Escape Plan, and you're just trying to wrestle with the systems and figure out how they all works. But similarly to that game, on my second and third plays, I found diminishing returns. Once I felt like I had understood the system, the process of going through it wasn't that rewarding because it kind of just sometimes felt like, oh, I know what I want to do, but first I have to do this and then I have to do this and I have to hope that this person is going to choose the action that's going to allow me to do that. It constrains you in ways that feel appropriate, but it also feels that you have to do a little bit of everything. You have to have some people in human resources because otherwise you're losing on a quarter of the actions in the game, right? Which kind of means you can never really specialize. You can't just be the construction guy. You can't just be the human resources guy. And I kind of found that over the course of playing my second and third games of it, the feeling that I had to do a little bit of everything just made it all feel a little bit monotonous. Like, I never felt as good as I did as when I was figuring out the game for the very first time.
So you never got a chance to really like feel like you could exploit anything? Like, it felt like you generally had to take the same sort of like have a finger in a bunch of different pies?
Yeah. And I think that one of the reasons for that actually is that in some ways something I would commend the game for, which is that the game doesn't have any randomization that shows up in the course of it. Like, there's a variable set up, but there's no card draw. Everything is open information and available at the start of the game. It's purely deterministic just based on the actions people take. But what that means is there aren't any big moments where you sort of see something and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this and exploit it and get something really powerful out of it. It kind of feels like everything is a little bit more, I mean, literally deterministic. It's like everything is a game of increments that take a long amount of time to set up. Sure. And because you can't just spring something on someone because that's not what the game is, it doesn't lead to those sorts of big crescendo moments. You're never going to do anything in Carnegie that you're like, bam, you didn't see that coming, and then like blow someone away because all the buildings are always available there. And they're all just slightly better than, say, the buildings you have available at the start of the game. You know, it's not like something like a Newsfjord where you look at all the buildings and you're like, oh, that one's really cool. I want to do that. I want to be able to be the guy that does this and this and this, because they all felt like slightly incrementally better versions of the same thing. So that's unfortunately my overall take of Carnegie, a game that I think is worth exploring. I think to the publisher's credit, they put the entire game on Board Game Arena during their Kickstarter. So worth trying out, I think, in that capacity. It's a very, very interesting design. I think it's also quite stunning. I sort of alluded to this earlier, but it's not a beige Euro game. It's an Ian O'Toole, beautiful, colorful game. Like, every section of the US is colored like a green and a purple and an orange. It just has that very clean but quite vibrant aesthetic to it. But I really don't think it's one I can see myself returning to now, having played it a few times.
That's too bad. This was one that I was interested in, but the way you're describing it is sort of turning me off. It does feel like that whole escape plan-y sort of increment deal. Yeah.
All said, I think that you're the one that would be more like... I certainly think that Kellen, it's not something that you would enjoy, in my opinion. Like, I do think it has too much of that Lacerda feel of just like, okay, I have to do a lot to accomplish a little. The steps are like not abstracted in the way that Lacerda's games are, where you feel like you have to do 5 different little fiddly things and to accomplish one small thing. But the process and the rule set in order to do a thing on the board is not quite one-to-one. That is Carnegie.
Taking things down to a much smaller game, I had the opportunity to play Divvy Dice this past weekend, which is made by the same publisher as Gone Shun Clever and Twice as Clever, and it's clearly evoking that roll and write area, but switching things up with a draftable set of pieces. So rather than having a player sheet, you are building a 3x3 grid during the game that is actually your score sheet. So the cards are divided into 2 types, scoring cards and bonus cards, and you'll be drafting them into a 3x3 grid and then using those cards to try to play a game remarkably similar to Gone Shun Clever and filling in the spots on your grid to score the most points relative to your neighbor. So this game has a market row, and you will roll all the dice. And if you want to buy from the market row, it costs 4 of a kind or 3 of a kind for the cards that have been there longer. And so ultimately your choice is, should I use these dice to fill in the cards that I already have, or should I try to use them to acquire new cards? How this works if you are a passive player, if you're not the active player, is that if the opponent re-rolls any of the dice, you get to use one of the dice that they re-roll. What that means is, if they re-roll twice, a la Yahtzee, you're getting 2 dice that you can fill in on your board. If they don't re-roll at all, you get jack meaning if they are extremely lucky and they keep their first roll, you don't get anything. The other interesting wrinkle here is that you cannot check off boxes on one of your 3x3 cards unless you can check off all of them. Now, that qualification only matters when it's your turn. So when it's not your turn and you're taking stuff from your opponent, that's when you're going to be checking off one corner, a second corner, to allow you on subsequent turns to be able to check them off altogether on one turn. So an individual card has sort of some of the same kind of things where the dice in the middle must be blue, but it's, dice greater than, blue dice greater than dice symbol. And, you got to get a 2, a 3, a blue 4, a 5, and a 6 in that square in order to get that score that card. The bonus cards are giving you little ways to screw with the game, just like they do in Ganz schön clever. Go up one die, go down one die, use any color die for a slot, etc., etc. I think that the promise of this game is very promising. How's that for a sentence? But in practice, it changes your decision-making process to a part of the game that I just don't care for, which is to say first that the first thing that you have to do is instead of rolling your dice and getting excited about all the combos that you might make, you're actually sitting there worried every single time you roll, I don't want to give Christina anything. If I re-roll these dice, I'm giving Christina something. So every time you re-roll, it's painful, as opposed to that, ooh, excited, what am I going to get sort of feeling. In addition to that, a lot of what you're deciding to do on your turn is, do I have enough empty cards, or should I try to draft more cards? The tempo of the game is actually a lot of what you're doing, because once someone has a 3x3 grid, that triggers the end of the game. But it became my turn, and Christina had every card filled in, so I could re-roll as much as I wanted because she had nothing to fill in. And so it offloads the fun parts of, oh my god, what kind of combo can I score, for a modular system that is more about the tempo of the game, and also it penalizes you for re-rolling the dice, which is the most fun part of Ganz schön clever in the first place. I thought this was fine. It's a little long, and I don't like everything that it's done in the interest of being modular. Some of the bonuses aren't as exciting, but the promise of it is there, and I wanted to like it more than I did. And I think, Neelan, I'll hand this off to you because I think you should try it. And this isn't in the lower echelon of if someone makes a bad game, they usually make it a rollin' right? Like, we know that. Everyone knows that.
Uh-huh.
This is not that. But just in comparison, it's just sort of like, it doesn't have the same fun, the same bonus feeling. Mm-hmm. And then every time you roll, you feel bad about it. And then the combos aren't as extravagant or as exciting to fit into this modular system.
Yeah.
And one of the main primary choices that you're making is, how should I push the tempo of this game, as opposed to just burying my head in my score sheet and going, yapoo, yippee, yaha.
I think it's a cool idea. Like, I like the idea of, the variability that must provide, but, I think that's probably exactly what you're saying. That's probably its downfall. That, it not feeling like it coheres as nicely as, Ganz schön clever does.
Look at the cards on Board Game Geek, and they remind me a little bit of Fuse, the cards on Fuse. I don't know if you have played that game, but the way that Fuse has these qualifiers, to activate this card, all the numbers have to be same. Or
yeah, you're right, because in Ganz schön clever, what we're comparing it to, there's the blue is dramatically different than the green, and that is not really what happens here. They're much more rudimentary, where 2 of the dice have to be the same, 3 have to be a different number, and that's the whole card. Or just all of the dice on this have to add up to more than 20 or 30. So it's been reduced to fit that mechanism where you can only score a card if you can score the whole card on one turn. Very interesting. You can see why it exists and what it does, and it has markers, and it's nice. I would say that if you've exhausted your roll and writes and you can't get enough, I would recommend Divvy Dice above the lower crop of these games, but for me in my house, I will never play it again. Literally, I will never play it again because I have Ganz schön clever, twice as clever, and we've got triple so clever. I'm sure that's how you say that.
Yep.
To still try.
Yeah.
Quick question, because I think it's such a crucial aspect of roll and writes, at least for me. You said length was an issue. How long does this game go?
That's a good question. It took us probably more than an hour. Probably.
Oh,
wow. For a 2-player roll and write, that is nuts.
Well, our most recent game, I lost. And that's because I decided to rush the end game. Right? I was doing way better than her, and then I'm like, okay, let's just kill this. And I went for the kill, and then she won. So she'll listen to this and have different umbrage. But a lot of the decision-making of okay, it's clear that I'm winning right now, so I should try to push the end game, And so you may not feel like you're winning, and then you actually may just wait and try to make sure every single card is precise and perfectly placed within your grid. So it follows some of that rules that you have in any grid-based game where it's like it's 3x3, you can't extend it into a fourth there, so the orthogonally, some of the adjacency kind of stuff that you see all across the map in board gaming. But yes, probably too long. And I guess we played it 2 players. I don't know what that would do with more players.
Yeah.
Probably not shorten it.
No.
Oh, and that's the other thing. If you're AP at all, right, the player that's choosing one of the dice is choosing from the ones that you're re-rolling. So you're literally like, I'm going to re-roll it, and then you're like, And then in some cases, and in cases with Christina, you may be waiting over a minute before you get to re-roll those dice. But every single time it's like, and I screwed up numerous times where I'm like, damn it, like I've already like re-rolled these in my hand. I'm sorry, Christina. And that is Divvy Dice, a roll and write that you might be interested in.
So in my continuing pursuit to play all my unplayed games, I broke out Underwater Cities. This is a game I got a couple of years ago, and I remember it having a lot of hype when it was released. And then I felt like I heard a lot of things that maybe sort of turned me off on it. Primarily, there's this idea that it's a game where you take actions by playing cards of one of 3 colors to spots of one of 3 colors, and if the colors match, you get a bonus, and that seemed a little weird to me. It seemed like not very exciting. And also, there was the talk that it's quite a long game, which I don't mind a long game, but if it's markedly long where people are commenting on it, then it sort of scares me off. So I put this off for a while, but decided, I'm trying to go through all my unplayed games. Let's try Underwater Cities. I am a fan of Suchi, and I've become a bigger and bigger fan of his in playing some of his like lesser remarked upon games. Like, I guess Shipyard is pretty popular, but 20th Century is a game that is not very popular of his that I really, really enjoy. And I'm a big fan of Shipyard, so that was another impetus to try Underwater Cities. In Underwater Cities, what you're doing is, as I've mentioned, you are taking actions by playing cards to spots on the board. The cards come in 3 colors, yellow, green, and red, and the spots come in 3 colors, yellow, green, and red. No matter what card you play to any spot, you're taking the action of the spot. So if a spot lets you build a biodome, then you're going to be building a biodome no matter what. But if the colors match, then you get to do the action or the bonus that's on the card. You're getting resources to build out your infrastructure, which is this like biodomes, and you're building tunnels between the biodomes on your own personal board where you can produce goods, and also building these tunnels to connect the biodomes because they all have to be connected to produce goods. And you're also trying to connect to these spots on the corners of your board, which are sort of hard to get to, because if you do, you get an influx of resources. And then the spot on the opposite corner of the board from where you start, if you reach that with a tunnel, you get a end game scoring that's specific to you, that is randomized on every game. So that is how Underwater Cities generally works. I really, really enjoyed it. I had a great time playing it. What I love about the game is that every card has, in contrast to what Neil was talking about with Carnegie, every card, this bonus that you can activate, has a really unique and sometimes crucial to where you are in the game aspect to it, like a bonus to it. So, if you color match this card, I want to take the action on the board, but wow, this bonus that it's giving me, or this thing that it's letting me do that breaks the rules, is going to really help me out now, or is just really cool, or it's whatever. Every card promises this like fun aspect to it. Whenever you do your card draw, you're looking at it like, let me see what these cards can make me do. That is balanced by the fact that you have a very tight hand limit. You can only hold very few cards in your hand, and so you're always forced to give up cards that you otherwise would keep. This is a game that has a nice balance. I was talking about Reavers of Midgard last week, where you get a bunch of stuff all over the place and you rarely feel like you're out of resources. This strikes a balance where, yes, these bonuses can give you a lot of resources, and you can feel like flush in a specific type of resource, and there's a number of different resources that you all sort of need, but you never feel like you're comfortable with the amount of resources you have. So there's always some level of need or some level of struggle. You never feel content in where you are economically, for lack of a better term. The game that this feels a lot like to me, and is a much better implementation, is Terraforming Mars. Terraforming Mars is a game where you have a bunch of cards, and the cards can do a lot of crazy things, and you can have a lot of things happening and a lot of things to manipulate. But with Terraforming Mars, the card draw feels random, and obviously the card draw is random with Underwater Cities, but the thing that Underwater Cities does is it tiers it. There are 3 rounds in Underwater Cities, and the first round has 1 set of cards, the second round has a second set of cards, third round, third set of cards, and there's like a sense of building up, a sense of like, these cards are better than these cards, and these cards are now like geared toward the end of the game, whereas with Terraforming Mars, a lot of the early cards, sure, they're great if you can fire them off, but, it'd be better if you could get these later. So Underwater Cities handles that beautifully. It also scratches that itch that I did like from Reavers of Midgard, where you're getting these combos, you're doing these things that are really, really fun. You draw a card, you've got like 4 cards to choose from, but you have to discard one. Which am I going to discard? You almost always want to do a color match, but sometimes, and this is another aspect of the game, the worker placement spots where you're placing these cards are very tight. There are spots where you want to jump on them as soon as it's your turn, because if you don't, somebody else is going to grab them. And there are certainly situations where, I need to take that spot that allows me to buy special cards. It's a class of card that can do even more game-breaking things or like end-game points. And so I want to jump on that because there's only 3 rounds, but I don't have any orange cards to color match. What am I going to do? Should I just play an off-color card, take the special card, or do I want to play something else that color matches in hopes that I draw an orange card? Or manipulate the game in such a way where I'm drawing more cards in hopes to get an orange card? It is on the long side. It didn't feel especially long. It didn't feel like crushingly long. We were playing at 3 players, where 2 of the players, myself and another player, it was the first time we tried it, and the game took 2.5 hours, which is long, but is not crazy long for a heavy, Euro-y sort of game. I really, really enjoyed it. Just really fun. The card powers and the stuff is really fun. It's not as crazy like Innovation or anything where the card's like bonkers.
But what is?
But what is, that's right.
Mark.
Yes.
You had a very long explanation there. You were going really well.
That's right.
I wanted to just say that up front. You have not used the word interaction, and so you have scared me. So I actually really have never played Terraforming Mars or this, which are frequently compared together. I've always wanted to try this. The length scares me. But then, we just got through, 70 minutes of you explaining it there.
70. I was timing at 71.
Yeah, 75.
But that was a really good guess.
Yeah, thank you. But without the word interaction. So, like, the card combos, I'm all aboard. Do you think that the worker placement that you described would be enough to keep me engaged?
I actually do think so, because it's the Agricola thing. It is the Agricola thing. It's not a Feast for Odin thing.
Yeah.
It's there are spots. You can get stuff done. If you're blocked from something, you're not destroyed. Yes, you can do something else, but there is a blocking thing going on. It's not as punishing as Agricola, but there is some of that there. I don't think this is going to be your favorite game of all time, but I think you would like it. And I don't think you have a problem with a 2.5 hour game that is fun, even if it's a little Euro-y.
Not at all. I was perusing some of the 5 out of 10 reviews on BGG, and I just love it when you get to that group that's there's too much card draw in my strategy game.
Right.
And so that's how I thought, maybe I'll like this. If those people don't like it.
Have you played Sneelan?
No, I haven't, but I'm very intrigued too, and I've definitely heard the Terraforming Mars comparisons, which actually always put me off in the past, because as someone that I'm always a little bit underwhelmed by Terraforming Mars, having it compared to that made me feel like this wasn't something that I necessarily need to jump on. But if you're saying it's what Terraforming Mars should be, it's that, but the good for you at least version of this, and that does excite me. And I'm not gonna lie, this is gonna sound tacky, but the little bubbles.
They're good, man. They're cool. They're cool. Those domes are cool. Yeah. Domes are cool. That's what I've always said. It's funny, too. I actually had not heard the Terraforming Mars stuff. I've now come to see that a lot of people make that comparison, but it was a thought I had independent of that. And it's apt. It's apt. There's that card draw. All the cards do cool things, but I just think it's done much better. And that is Underwater Cities by Vladimir Suchi.
It's he also made Pulsar, which I did not enjoy.
Oh, okay. I've never played Pulsar.
People seem to like Praga, though.
I'm more excited about Praga now after playing Underwater Cities.
Yeah, but Praga, you have to have glue, Mark, which I'm sure you don't have in your house.
I did not like Last Will either. His game Last Will. I know it's one of his most popular ones.
You're trying to spend all the money, Mark.
It's so weird because that aspect of it throws me off. The fact that you want to buy high and sell low. It's antithetical to everything that I
can't
believe
wrap
in.
your brain around it.
Yeah, I really had a hard time with that.
It's they made the game normal and then just like swapped the things and then changed the theme to Last Will, and you've been had.
It's crazy. Like, I feel like there's a way that I should just like see that inversion and be like, okay, I get it. It's just an inversion and it shouldn't be a problem, but it's a big problem.
Big problem.
So I'm going to hijack this mid portion from Kellen and say that before we move on to our main topic, I was surprised to see that my comment about wanting 300 reviews before my birthday, which is, as everybody should know, April 11th, was actually heeded. And we've gotten a couple of reviews, even a couple that mention the push to 300 for my birthday. So I am very, very appreciative of that and excited about it. And furthermore, I just had a auction of a bunch of my games. And what I'm going to do is, if we get to 300 by April 11th, I am going to send 10 games to 10 people randomly selected who have left us reviews. This is going back to review number 1. If I can track you down, I'm going to send 10 games for free to these people. There's no strings attached, except the game will probably be a game that I don't like very much. So there's that. But if you're willing to take a game that is maybe not good, you're going to get it for free.
I'm going to warn you, Mark. It might be hard to do because you only have like usernames to go by here.
That's fine.
He will find you.
That's right.
He will give you that game.
That's right.
No matter what.
So let me read one of the aforementioned reviews that we just got. This is the very appropriately titled Mark's Birthday 300 Review Push. Perfect. Love that. This is by Michael with an exclamation mark at the end of the second Michael. Great podcast for board games. Terrible for my bank account as this has spurred several purchases. Well, Michael, you're in luck because if we get to 300, the next game you're going to get is not going to hurt your bank account because I'm going to send it to you, maybe, if you win, for free. So let's get to 300. Right now, I'm showing that we have 226 ratings. So I'm feeling like, although we got 4 in a day, that's quite a pace we have to keep up with. So we are, by my count, 74 reviews away. By Kellen's count, 75. So let's get... Never mind. So let's get that last 74 in, and you'll have a 1 in 30 chance. 1 in 30 chance to get a free game. That's nothing to sneeze at. So wherever you find us, leave a review and get us to 300 by 411. 300 by 411. Trademark.
Are you out of the mud yet?
Am I out of the mud yet?
Yeah, come on back up here. Like, you were down there selling cars. All right, so today's featured topic is a spectrum from thriving to barely surviving. Spun out from a conversation that we started last week. We wanted to sit down and chat about it because I have a hypothesis. And that hypothesis is that board games can largely be chucked into one of two categories. Games that make you feel like you're thriving, and games that you feel like you're scraping by, games that you are barely surviving. And nothing typifies this better than Mr. Uwe himself and his games Agricola on the barely surviving side and A Feast for Odin on the thriving side. In one corner we have Agricola, where you struggle to feed your people, and when you don't, you get... You want one specific worker placement spot to get your wood, you get... And then when you get to the end of the game says, you do not have enough pigs, sir. You do not have enough sheep, sir. And your score goes negative, 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 negative. And that is barely surviving Agricola.
And you feel like you got...
And on the other side, we have Mr. Uwe's, Mr. Neelan's number 1 favorite board game of all time, A Feast for Odin, where no matter what you do, there are 70 million action spaces, and each one of them gives you 1.1 to 1.15 points. And they make your board more colorful. And then you upgrade your colors. And then you fill in your Tetramino puzzle. And then at the end of the game, you look at your kingdom and you say, wow, what a kingdom have I created here.
Didn't we all have fun?
I am thriving. And not... So, friends, that is the setup, right? I've set it up for you. So now, I guess I would ask you, do you agree? And what I think is interesting about this, right, is that A lot of times we divide things along a very bad spectrum of Eurogame to Ameritrash game, which barely works. But this idea of what does it feel like? Does it feel like you are thriving while you play this game, or does it feel like you're barely surviving? And I keep saying that so that it sort of, is it rhyme that I'm doing? That it rhymes with itself, even though like I want to change the word because I just like keep repeating myself like an idiot.
You're branding.
Branding, thank you. But what makes this interesting is that even in a specific classification, even in heavy Euro games, right, they feel dramatically different. And some of them do feel like you're barely getting anything accomplished. And then other games you look up and you say, look at my kingdom, good sir. So what I say to you is, do you agree with this classification? Can we throw all board games into the sort of barely surviving or thriving bucket?
Oh, I don't know about all board games, but...
Neelan, you agreed to the
topic.
I
already agreed to the topic as a setup, because I'm only here to tell you how wrong you are about A Feast for Odin.
Oh, no.
No, I largely agree with you on the premise, and I think that while I love both of these games, I think that there is something to this idea that this is, in some ways, your overall feel of a game, right, is whether you come away feeling good about what you did, and it's something that I feel like a lot of modern design tries to accomplish, especially in the window of time that most games get played, which is to say it has to impress very quickly. And typically that is easier to achieve if everyone steps away from the board game after their first play and is like, oh, that was a cool, pleasant experience. I had a good time doing that. Versus the sorts of games that we talk about a lot as games that we typically enjoy. Mark describes this all the time, of that feeling like sometimes your best turn is not doing something, feeling like you're struggling and feeling like the game is like clawing against you and you're just barely hanging on to it. And that feeling of feeling like you're overcoming odds at every step of the way can be its own reward, but it's a different sort of reward. And I do think that there is something to the idea that games generally fall into one, or I'd say good games generally fall into one of those two categories. Games where you can see all the times where the game was trying to beat you down and you sort of still managed to keep your head above water, and ones where you just were feeling good about everything you were doing at every point.
And I think that even can extend to, I know we're talking mostly about Euros, but I think that can extend to quote-unquote Ameritrash games, and even, and we were talking about this before the recording, even party games, I think, can fall into these categories. Compare, and this is maybe poor classification on my side, but the idea of like a game like Sushi Go, where you're always getting points, no matter what card you lay down, you're getting points, versus a game, and again, this is a loose interpretation of the word party, but a party game like Resistance, where it's like you're always fighting. Am I in it? Am I revealing too much? That sort of like feeling. I feel like, yeah, there may be small shades one way or the other, but I think all games can be thrown into one or the other bucket.
I think that Neelan and I have sussed this out over many, many moons, talking about a game that I love, Trois, and how Trois, a heavy Euro dice drafting game, does a lot of things to prevent you from doing anything that you actually want to do. It presents you with beautiful combos, and then it says, but by the way, you have to deal with these event dice first, so gimme, gimme, gimme. Oh, by the way, you're not the starting player, so Mark is going to buy some of your dice, so you don't get to do that combo. Oh, by the way, now you don't have enough money to afford the combo that you want to spin off on your turn. And what is interesting about this is that I love that sort of harshness, that sort of barely getting by, and when you do get a combo, it feels so glorious. But I remember showing Neelan his first game of Trois, and I saw in his eyes, I saw the beauty of Trois, and I saw it get crushed out of him round after round after round. And one of the things that I've always said about the expansion of the Ladies of Trois is that it takes the game and makes it looser by giving you a wild die that no one else can buy. And in that moment, in Neelan's suffering, I realized that the Ladies of Trois is actually allowing you to have just that little bit more control, that a little bit more feeling of like, I can do something. And I knew that Neelan needed that in his life more than I did. And so, all joking aside,
well, before we start setting aside joking, let me just say that Neelan doesn't need any more ladies in his life.
Totally. Like, I am not struggling on that department.
Yeah. So, okay, back to the
I'm thriving. But no, I think there's something to that, and I think that is a good example of where expectations are important, right? Because like you're describing the process of me looking at Trois and expecting the thriving game and like not getting that. And like, it's not that I ordinarily would say like, oh, I don't love games where you're scrabbling. Like there are a lot of games that fall under that category that I absolutely love, but I was going in expecting one thing and I got something different. And that's like this mismatch in my expected feelings from the game.
And Neelan, it's important to remember that we're not using the term scrambling, we're using the term survive, so please stay on brand.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, largely we agree, right? I mean, I made a hypothesis I knew they would agree with. So we can move right along, because they've offered no resistance.
Before we move on, I will disagree with Trois. Because for me, Trois is a game where, yes, I see all these combos I can potentially do, and I'm seeing in my head, I'll be able to exchange these 2 dice for 15 actions of this amazing combo and all this stuff. Yep. And yes, there are these like negative events you have to deal with. And yes, people can buy your dice out from under you and there's nothing you can do. However, I am going to fire off some of these combos and it's going to feel cool. And yes, there will be some level of survival that I'll have to do because I'm not going to be able to do everything I want to do and I have to react on the fly. But I do feel like I'm thriving in the times that I can exchange these dice for these combos and fire a bunch of stuff off.
Are we establishing the get good principle, whereby Mark says he's better at the game than everyone else, so everyone else is barely surviving, but he's thriving.
That's right.
Because of Mensa. I think that largely players will have sort of some level of preference for them, and some of that comes from your aptitudes towards the game. And I know that's not exactly what you're saying about Trois, but if you're predisposed to sort of that abstract strategy, deterministic 5 turns from now, you may actually feel like you are thriving more often in those situations, even though, me, Kellen, is terrible at that. But I think that, largely speaking, if we had to identify each other, I would say that Neelan is further along the spectrum of liking the games that allow everything to flourish, everything to thrive, as we say on the Board Game Garage podcast, versus barely surviving, which feels more in my realm of just hatred and chaos and everything bad in the world.
That is your realm.
Thank you for saying. So we thought that we could go into this next section and sort of broadly talk about some games and where they fit into this categorization, whether it's a spectrum or whether it's more like just hoppers that we're throwing the games into left and right. Who wants to go first?
So, I wanted to talk about one of the games that I love a lot, where I feel like the barely surviving thing comes into the fore, is something like a Through the Ages, where the game is quite explicitly designed to like not give you an overabundance of things. It's like you're not going to be able to do all the things you want. You sort of have to pick specific lanes. And in fact, the game actually explicitly punishes you for excess. Like if you're producing too much, you go into corruption and you're not producing as a result of that. So the game wants you to very precisely to stay within your lane. Like you're producing this much, you're going to use this much, you're not going to be able to accrue goods. And that kind of sort of got me thinking about what other civilization games or games in that genre kind of fill the opposite end of the spectrum. I couldn't find anything that was an exact one-to-one, but it got me thinking about like what we sort of almost come to call like the Stonemaier design philosophy, right? In something like a Scythe, which is loosely 4X adjacent, and something like a Tapestry, which is loosely civilization game adjacent, but they both share
throwing spitfire.
Yeah, exactly. But they both share kind of the Stonemaier philosophy, which I think is exactly what we're talking about, which is the games do not want to overtly make you feel like you're barely surviving. They want you to feel like by the end of the game, you have created like a thriving economy, whether that's in something like a Wingspan, where unlike a lot of engine building games, in Wingspan, you're going to get to fire up the engine and hammer it a bunch of times before the end of the game. In something like a Scythe, the game does not overly constrain your ability, once you're out of your starting zones at least, to move around the map and acquire resources you need to build the things you need. Like everyone will have some buildings, everyone will have some mechs, etc. And Tapestry, I think, is maybe a really good example of this, where the game almost overtly awards you for things that are not that sharply correlated with like board state or this intense feeling like you have engineered yourself into a specific avenue.
I've only played Tapestry a few times, but isn't it that explicitly your turn is to move up a tech track?
Right, exactly.
So the fundamental nature of your turn is level up.
Totally. So on every turn, you're literally advancing. You're advancing up a track and then gaining points. Like, the reward structure there is so baked into the design philosophy, which is to say that it has a very overt reward structure. It is constantly about making you feel like you accomplished something on your turn. And I have no issue with that, generally speaking. But like I've said many times before, Scythe is one of my favorite games. But it is interesting how harshly that conflicts with other sort of 4X games that are sort of more, I would say, Euro resource discipline minded, like something like an Eclipse, where you kind of feel like you are constraining against your resources a little bit more. Yeah.
So when it came to thinking of both ends of this survive, thrive spectrum, a designer actually sprung to mind more than any games, and that designer is Stefan Feld. You've got examples with his games of very survive, struggly games. The one that we talked about over and over is, I think, Nealon's favorite Feld, In the Year of the Dragon, which is like, again, this is a game where you just know from the beginning, you're taught from the beginning, your people are going to die. Your people are going to die. You're going to have to struggle round to round to find some way to claw enough resources to have them make it year to year. And even with that, you're going to fail. And that's very evocative of how the game feels. You feel like every round, I just need to make it. I need to somehow get what I need to make it through the next round. You also feel that with Feld, with Macao. Macao is a game that's being re-implemented as Amsterdam, I think, this year. Macao has a system where you are taking on contracts that can give you bonuses, but once you have taken a contract, a clock starts. And if you don't fulfill the contract by a certain number of turns, you are going to start accruing negative points. So you have the promise of, oh, this card is very cool, and the cooler cards require more resources. So like there's that, shiny big card that you want to take, but especially with the bigger cards that require a diversity of resources or more resources, the chances that you're going to be able to hit it before the clock runs out are smaller, and therefore you feel that drag on you. You feel that like, oh my God, I've got to get out from under this contract that I accepted. So there's that clawing nature to it. On the other side, with Feld, I think the Castles games feel very thrivey to me. The games being Castles of Burgundy and Castles of Tuscany. In the game, every time it's your turn, you are adding to your board these tiles that fire off some sort of bonus. And, in some cases, the specific tiles have a bonus associated with them that is wholly unique. And yes, there is some need to dice manipulate to try to get the tiles you want on the board or to draft tiles you want, but it's not super difficult to get tiles. And it's a game where if somebody takes a tile you want, or if you get the dice roll that you don't want, and even if you can't mitigate it, there is often a secondary or tertiary option that is not as good as the one you wanted, but it's still fun. It's still going to do something to advance your game state. And then the other game from Feld that feels like that to me, and sort of goes along with the Underwater Cities feeling that I talked about earlier, is Bruges. Bruges is a game where every card has a special power, and every time you draft cards, they offer all these different ways to use them. And yes, you may not draw the cards you want, or you may not have the resources you want to do exactly what you want, but there's often something you can do that feels good. And so you feel like you're thriving.
While we're on the topic of Feld, actually, you reminded me of my second favorite Feld game, which could not be the more polar opposite of In the Year of the Dragon, which is the Oracle of Delphi, which is exactly that feeling where you're able to do a lot and you have a lot of stuff at your disposal in order to mitigate dice and sort of overcome your accomplishments. And it's about who can do that marginally more effective than anyone else, right? That's a good designer to look to for both sides of that coin.
And I think what makes Feld interesting as sort of helping us illustrate the dichotomy is that you might think that, point salad, which is what Feld gets tapped with, is sort of like, well, all of those are thrivey. And Macao is a fantastic game, and I think if I had played it more, it would be in my top 50, where you still score for everything, but it doesn't feel good. Nothing about it feels good. Every turn is agonizingly frustrating. It always feels like you're 3 turns behind. And so it isn't just that, point salady Euro games are thrivey games. Like, there is sort of the spectrum within it. The examples that I wanted to talk about is a game that cannot be killed, and that is Splendor. Splendor just has this, you're always growing. It's always this like, even when you're losing a game of Splendor, you're like, well, I could buy any 3 diamond card. And like, you feel so good about it. When that card comes off the deck, you're like, I could get that for free. I could get that for free. I could get that for free. That no matter what you do, it feels like you are thriving. Now, in Splendor, if I am playing Splendor and, I have this dumb grin on my face because I can afford any 3 diamond card, but I have 2 points and Mark has 12. That is going to be a damper on my ability to feel like I'm thriving. But I do think that the part of what makes the game so fun and so impervious to being killed is that constant feeling of progression that leads to feeling like you're thriving. And the other example that I wanted to bring up is a game that I think does both. But wait, Kellen, you said that they could only go in one of the 2 shoots. But when you have a game like Root, what you actually have is a series of independent little Euro games that are all jammed together. Root, if you don't know what it is all the cute animals in the woods fighting each other, and every faction plays so dramatically different that you actually have factions that are more about starting from a place of control and sort of being in charge of what's going on and really just being a powerful figure in the game, to factions that are just barely like, they're the ambush faction, or their job is just like to not screw it up, and every turn feels more painful. And part of the reason that Root is successful is that it appeals to all these type of gamers.
I think that's a good point, like specifically in the context of a faction like the Eyrie Dynasty, right? They start off from one position on the board, and every turn, as you're looking at your hand of cards, thinking like, oh god, no, I don't even think I'm going to be able to do this without just blowing my whole thing up. And that feels bad. Meanwhile, the cats occupy every other position on the board, and they're,
Yeah.
I think asymmetric games are a good place to look at like the conjunction of some of these elements all in one, and Root, I think, does that better than most.
So let me ask you a question, Kellen.
Oh, no.
You say everything sort of fits in these 2 baskets. And I think, I as I said, I agree with you for the most part. But as is so often the case, I think you've missed some of the nuance.
But at the end, Mark, we're going to do this now?
Yeah. Oh, better late than never. That's what I always say. So we talked about Feast for Odin. You've got a feast for Odin. You got this whole thing in front of you, points. You're building this thing, you got all these things. What about a game like Food Chain Magnate? Okay. It's a game where it does feel tough. It's a game where, yes, you can be out in the second turn. However, you yourself said that in Food Chain Magnate, you can be out early, but you're fine because you become the guy who is the big marketer guy. I'm the burger marketer, right?
Yep.
And you feel good about that.
Mm-hmm.
And you also said that in games like Agricola, you can be out, but I'm the boar king. I specialize in
Boar Baron, Mark. Know your history.
Boar Baron. Or I'm doomed to repeat it. So how do you square that? How do you square a game that is, yes, on one hand, has this survivey feel, but
oh God,
you also
are you sharing a chart right now? Is that
yeah,
what I'm
I would like
at?
to propose, as I always do, let's take this x-axis and add a y.
Mark, we're at the end. Why are we doing
a whole
this?
new dimension in the last 5 minutes?
That's right. I'm going to add a z-axis if you don't cut this off.
Okay, so you're proposing that there is a y-axis to my x-axis, and that y-axis has something to do with how punishing the game is?
Yes, exactly. So you have the thrive, survive, right?
Yeah.
One end,
which
there's
was
like survival.
nice and concise, and everyone could understand it.
Yeah. So
and it would go really well in a tweet.
Yeah.
And then now you have a chart that looks like you made it on the side of a paper box.
Exactly.
That you've shared.
We will put this chart that I did literally put on the side of a paper box on our Discord in the podcast channel. So I'm going to propose there's a y-axis, which is on one side, punishing games. You have a survive aspect in the, if I mess up early, I'm going to lose this game. So it's punishing in that respect. And so that feels surviving in a different way. And then on the other side of the y-axis, you have a game where no matter what you do, you're going to stay close. So you're thriving because no matter what you do, you're going to be in the game. You're not going to be like crushed. So you can feel some sort of level of being comfortable that no matter what you explore, you're going to be okay.
And Neelan, you want to back me up here?
So the question I really have for you is like, what would be a good example of something that occupies like the four corners of this chart, right? So you mentioned like FCM.
So, okay, here we go. I'm going to do it, okay? In the extreme punishing / thrive. So it is punishing, yet you can still thrive, is FCM. Yes, you can be out in the first round, if you mess up, but you can be, like Kellen said, the burger marketer, or whatever you want. You can do your own thing and feel good about that at the end
you're
of the game.
still struggling, but you have something to show for it at the end. Like something
it's a game where
you've accomplished.
Yes, so let's say
And that's going to do it.
Vito, that's where the struggle is on the lower end of the axis. On the top is a game where no matter what you can do, you're going to be in striking distance. So let's say the top of my axis, you don't have the pressure to...
That's going to do it.
You don't... Vito, you don't have the pressure of losing if you make a mistake, okay? So free of that. It's a game that's free of that, and is also thrivey, is something like a Feast for Odin. Like,
sure.
You can take different paths, and you're probably going to be in the running at the end. You're probably, if you don't play smart, you're going to lose, and you might lose early, but you're going to be in the ballpark no matter what you do, and you can explore different paths without having a feeling of like real pressure that if I make a mistake, I'm done. All right, let's go to the other side. I'm halfway there, Calvin. I'm halfway there. In the very punishing and struggling end, so the lower left of this quadrant, is a game like Estates. Estates is a game where if you mess up early, you're going to get screwed and you might lose. And also, at the end of Estates, you don't necessarily feel like you have created anything. Even if you win the Estates, there's not really much to show for it. There's nothing you've really created. It's like these rows, and you don't really you have ownership on some of them, but there's not really any like, I've done this. I've created something.
You can win on 0 with the estates. So, yeah, I get what you're putting down here.
Have done, in fact. And then finally in the last quadrant.
That's going to do it.
I'm in the last quadrant. Give me the last quadrant.
Okay, so what is if I'm understanding this correctly, the struggling to survive game where you're still feeling good by the end of it?
Biblios.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked.
Oh, my God.
I'm glad we can end this episode on Biblios, because Biblios is a game where you don't really have much to show for it, because some people don't like the theme. I feel like I have a lot to show for it, but I'm talking about the common man doesn't feel like they have a lot to show at the end of Biblios, because, you just scored a couple points, and, you don't have this grand thing. You haven't built a structure. You haven't built a city. You have just these cards in front of you. There's no, like, huge thing at the end. But no matter what you do at the end of Biblios, the scores are going to be close. Now, yes, losing 1-7 on Biblios is getting crushed, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like at the end of Biblios, you feel like you might win it. You might have a chance. It's not often in Biblios where you feel like I'm done because I made a mistake.
Mark, you had me until Biblios.
Yeah. You had the listeners going until we all realized you invented a y-axis just to add Biblios to the list.
That's right.
And that is going to do it for another episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. Thank you so much for listening with us. You can chat with us on Facebook at BoardGameBarrage.com/Facebook in our group of over 800 members. You can chat with us on Discord in our group with well over 1,000. I don't even know how many. BoardGameBarrage.com/Discord. You can get bonus episodes of the podcast at BoardGameBarrage.com/Patreon. Thank you so much to Heart Society Music for their song, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album, Wake the Queens. That is going to do it for tonight. So long.
The push to 300 continues. Do it by 411.
Bye-bye.
So my question for but who wants to go first? Who wants to go first?
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in with mine
first. Who wants to go first? Who wants to go first? Who?